Welcome back to another video. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm joined by Keith Hackett, a well-renowned referee, top class referee, by the way. So I just want to say welcome, Keith.
Pleasure.
He's been around in the game since 1975. It's been a long road for you, Keith. And
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about your introduction to referee. So what made you start becoming into a referee? What made you interested?
Yeah, it actually started in 1960 when, as a player in a local team at grassroots level, the county FA decided that a player in every team had to learn the laws of the game. And I was the captain of that team, so stepped forward. I went to the county FA offices 6 evenings over 6 weeks, so one evening a week. We discussed and talked about the laws of the game. We were from law 1 to law 17 in detail. And then we had to take an examination. At this stage, I had no intention of becoming a referee. So I took the examination and passed. It was an easy exam. I didn't have to pay anything. Unlike today, when I think anybody who wants to take up the whistle has to pay about £140 to get to that point of passing the examination, if you like. So back I was playing, and then I got a phone call from the county FA saying, would I referee a football match? And they named the teams. Hillsborough Boys Club against Sheffield United Juniors. And before I could say yes, because I had no intention of refereeing, the phone was put down. And so I finished up borrowing kit, purchasing a whistle, and then from there continued to referee. So I had 12 years of refereeing at grassroots level. That included the Northern Premier League and the Yorkshire League, Saturdays, Sundays, midweeks, sometimes school games, complete mix. Sometimes Sunday morning when some of the players were rolling out of the pub late or the nightclubs late to get into the game. And then in 72, 73, I was promoted to the Football League linesman's list then, assistant referees now, but we were called linesmen. And then 2 or 3 years later, 75, as you mentioned, put onto the list of the Football League. And that was then, and throughout my career remained as an amateur in a professional environment. You've got to understand that. So I was lucky. A few years later, around about 79, I ran the line. I refereed a game at Hillsborough between Arsenal and Liverpool in a semi-final. I was a Sheffield Wednesday fan. And so my father had passed away. I can remember going to where I used to live in a terraced house that had been knocked down. I parked the car in some pretty desolate area and took the identical walk that I would have walked with my dad to the ground. So I walked the 3 miles, got to Hillsborough and refereed the football match. And it went to a draw. I did the replay. And that year in 79, I ran the line at Wembley in the final between Arsenal and Manchester United, which I think most people would say was the 5-minute final because everything happened literally in the last 5 minutes. Arsenal running out the winners.
You also managed. You also step up to. You were also present for the 1981 FA Cup final at Wembley between Spurs and Manchester City. You were only 36 at the time, if I'm wrong. So you're one of the youngest cup final referees. What was that like?
Um, you know
Tommy
when,
Hutchinson is scoring both of the
yeah,
goals, causing the game to go
well,
replay. What was that
uh,
like? That feeling being young, at very young
uh,
referee.
yeah, I think that obviously with the modern game now, with someone like Michael Oliver, who's much younger than that, and refereed the cup final at a much younger age. For me at the time, it was most unusual because the FA Cup final invariably at that time was refereed by a guy who was finishing his career rather than perhaps in the middle of it or starting it. And so there it was. I travelled down on the Friday morning from Sheffield. I drove down into the White's Hotel on Bayswater Road, which was used. On the Friday night, there's sort of a get-together of referees from all over the country. That's organised by the London Society of Referees, LONSAR, as it's known. Attended that. And then in the morning, went for a walk, had a reasonable breakfast. Nervous, yeah. And then we were chauffeur-driven to Wembley Stadium. I'd been there, obviously, in '79. I'd been there for a boys' club game as well. So I got a feel of the stadium. But what took place then was remarkable. The first game was 1-1. Again, you're asked before the start of the game, which is amazing now. You've got a choice. Either you take your match fee, which was then £35, or a gold medal. And so for me, it was an easy choice. It was a gold medal. But after the first game, which ended in a draw, I walked up the steps to meet the Queen Mother. And suddenly when I got onto the level bit, walking towards her, I was thinking, if she gives me the medal, I'm not going to get the replay. And so I bowed in the usual manner. She didn't give me the medal. I turned and I apparently had a very big, broad beam on my face, because at that point I got an indication that, because a replay at Wembley hadn't taken place in the cup final. And so as I got to the bottom of the steps, the FA guy said, just like you're going to get a fee and a medal, aren't you, at some point, because you're back on Thursday. The game was a real buzz in front of 90,000 spectators. It had been 100,000 on the Saturday, but because of security and all that goes, they reduced the number for a midweek game. And I think it's remembered mainly because of Ricky Villa's winning goal. And Spurs ran out the winners against Manchester City. And that really sparked, after that, I was, a few weeks later, advised that I was going to be a FIFA international referee, which I suppose is the pinnacle of refereeing. And at the same time, a few weeks later also, I got an invite to referee on the North American Soccer League. And that was literally an 8-week contract, refereeing across America. And it was fabulous, really. I was in America and Canada. So I'd referee Tulsa Roughnecks, Tampa Bay Rowdies, Chicago Sting, New York Cosmos on a couple of occasions, Vancouver Whitecaps. So these were iconic teams in America. The game was different. The entertainment was incredible. The build-up was similar to that you get with an American football game. You had to have 2 1-minute breaks in the first and second half. That was unusual. So if a player went down injured, you'd cross your arms, and they'd stop the clock because you had an independent timekeeper. And then after 1 minute, away you went, so that they could play 1-minute sads. There was never a draw in those games. They had a penalty shootout at the end, which was fascinating because the goalkeeper had to be stood on his line. And about 35 yards out, there was another line drawn, and a big clock was brought onto the ground. And then the player stood with the ball on that line, 35 yards away. And as I blew the whistle, he then had to run. The goalkeeper could come off his line. and attempt to score. Invariably they did, but I think it was probably a little bit more fairer than the current penalty shootout that we see in the Premier League and modern game. So, yeah, that was fascinating. In 1984, I was asked to write a book. And as a guy who didn't get his GCE level at school, but had acquired it in evening classes when I was at work, after I'd been at work, to write and have a book published by Collins Willow then, was remarkable. I can remember my school teacher saying, Hackett, you struggled to put two words together. And I always really, what are you going to do with your career? And I think that might have been a criticism, but it was also a spur, because I was a very young sales and marketing director in business. But I always remember when I wrote that book, the greatest pleasure I had wasn't the fee for writing the book or seeing it in W.H. Smith's as a pile of books for sale and your name on it. It was walking to my school and going through reception and asking if the school teacher was in. And she said, yes, is in room, whatever it was. And I sort of half stormed towards the room, knocked on the door, opened it, and he went, Hackett. And I went, there you are, and thrust the book into his hand. And I turned and said, I've written a book, you haven't, and walked out. That's another side of me at times. But yeah, really interesting. And, as an international referee, I went to 35 countries.
You also managed the 1988 European Championship, and one of the games I noticed you managed was West Germany's draw versus Italy. Now, back in those days, West Germany was seen as one of the best teams at the time. So I was just wondering, what was it like for you? Seeing those players, was it? You could tell could you tell they were like miles apart from the rest, or were they just different level?
I think that's a great question. I have to try and give a broad answer on that. I'd been on the same field as George Best and Bobby Charlton and Kenny Dalglish and Francis Beckenbauer, Giorgio Canaglia, Carlos Alberto, who lifted the World Cup when he played for New York Cosmos. So I think in that period I was very lucky, and even refereed Maradona. So I think that as a referee who loves football, because you have to love football to be a referee, you have to be passionate. It's just a massive honour being on the same pitch. I smile now when I watch Match of the Day and Sky, because the pundits that are on there are invariably players that I've refereed. And so I've seen them close up, and I've seen their passion as well. And whilst I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what they say, whilst I don't agree with some of the things they say, I do find myself nodding in agreement because of their knowledge and the way that they're able to communicate that to many thousands of spectators and players. The 88 European Championships and the opening game is almost a contradiction, because the organisation for that opening game is remarkable. A couple of weeks before, maybe a month before, I visited the Waldorf Hotel in London. I met the managing director of Itura, who were the manufacturers of Seiko watches. I was given the honour. There was a table full of Seiko watches, and because that was the timing company that was doing the competition, and they wanted every referee to wear a Seiko watch. I had to select the one that was going to be used in the competition. So, I mean, that was just a small thing. And then, of course, the kit and all that goes, because that's waiting for you at the hotel when you arrive. And then you've got the onerous task of sewing on the badge. And I had to do that at Wembley, funnily enough. I can remember doing a game with a colleague on a big game at Wembley, and I managed to sew the badge on, and actually at the same time sew it to the curtain in the room. So needlework is not my forte, but
It's not
I
mine
managed
either.
to put that right. The other referee who was running the line for me at that time, his wife was going to the game, so she fortunately pulled me out of the mire. Dusseldorf is a really nice city. It was, it's if you like an industrial area. The ground was packed. You're going through the security arrangements because when you're refereeing at the senior level, it's not just a game of football. It's an event. For example, a Premier League game. If you look at the sideline just before kickoff, you'll see there's a guy there. He's Sky Television, but he's more than that because the game and the Premier League is covered by 45 television broadcast companies around the world, and it's beamed to 211 territories around the world. Then just imagine if the referee says, well, I'm in charge of the time, so I'm going to kick off now. And it's not even on in Japan or South Africa or Australasia or wherever. So that timing element is important. And likewise with the Euros and the Champions League, or the equivalent, you get a countdown that's about 2 hours before kickoff. So, for example, you know exactly when you're going to be collected from your hotel that you're staying in. You know that you're going to be driven to the ground with police outriders. And then, when the team sheets are handed over, the security checks, and when the players enter the tunnel, and what time you leave the tunnel to get onto the field, and then, of course, the kickoff. So you're used to managing an event as much as you are managing a football match. But the Euros was a bit long-winded because you had to meet the Chancellor Cole before the game. But this wasn't new because I'd refereed a few years earlier. I did Gdansk versus Juventus when the country was closed to Westerners because of the Lech Walesa and the Shipyard Gates, the protests against the government. And there was a period when the Polish government was saying, no, we don't want an English referee doing this game. And FIFA and UEFA said, no, that's not the case. And therefore, in that sense, we had that. I was fortunate when I went to Gdansk, I met Lech Walesa, who then became the president. So these are ancillary things. Somebody's going to ask me a question about the car story with Carlos Alberto. Yeah. I was due to referee New York, Cosmos, and I was staying at the Adelphi Hotel in New York. Beautiful hotel. And I was in the car that was taking me to the ground, and we were stuck in Lincoln's Tunnel. There'd been an accident, so we just sat there. The driver was getting panicky, and I kept saying to him, look, don't worry, the game's not going to start. I'm the match referee. And he goes, I know, but I've got to get you to the ground and all. So he was beginning to panic a bit. And then a guy ran past the car, and the driver jumped out and started shouting, Carlos. And within a matter of a minute or two, sat next to me is Carlos Alberto, the Brazilian captain of New York Cosmos. And he sat at the side. We exchanged words, and we drove to the ground. And he was pretty calm at that stage. He wasn't, because he was going to get fined for turning up late. But yes, about 300-400 yards from the ground, I suddenly realised it wouldn't be good for me to get out of the car with the captain of New York Cosmos. And so I stopped the car, had the car, driver stopped the car, grabbed my bag, and walked the rest of the way. People in the car park were, because I got, we had a pretty jacket that was a bit glary. So everybody knew this jacket. I think it was green or blue, I can't remember, but everybody recognised, and they're saying to me, sign this autograph. And I'm going, just a minute. I'm signing that one and then walking on. They knew that I was the match referee, but amazing.
Keith Hackett, I'm not sure you know, but I am an Arsenal fan, and there's one video synonymous with you, and that's the 1990-1991 encounter between Man United and Arsenal. A match that everyone talks about for that 21-man brawl breaking out after an the hour mark, and Arsenal being docked 2 points. And I just want to get what exactly was happening from your perspective, because
I think that's a great question, and it's great to have the opportunity to answer it. Both teams were at the top of the game, and they were terrific to referee. I love refereeing Arsenal and Man United. And remember, when I was refereeing Arsenal, it was at Highbury, and I love the new stadium, but Highbury was something special. I mean, it was just like, it was almost like going into a museum. It was commissionaires on the door, the bust of a former manager, tiled, and then knocking on the sort of window to check in, and then so the whole process was almost repeated every time you went to Arsenal. So here I am. Arsenal had been in trouble. I think they'd had a game against Norwich, and it had blown up a bit, and there'd been a bit of a mass confrontation. So there was a little bit of record that they'd been warned as to the future conduct. I think both Norwich and Arsenal. So we got to Manchester United at Old Trafford, and obviously it's a packed house. It's completely, well, yeah. You walk from the car park into the sort of across the road at Old Trafford, and then down by the side running parallel to the railway line, which is on the left-hand side, to get to the dressing room. So the game was going brilliantly. It was tough, very competitive, but there were lots of players who I knew, and I thought they were doing really well, and it was okay. I was concentrating. I knew that any time there was always a risk. And then out of nothing, it blew up. And there were 21. Look, I think there was only David Seaman who stayed in his... I think it was David Seaman, stayed in his sticks. Everybody else joined in. And I'm a pretty big guy, so I piled in as well.
So who started it? Who started it? Tell me exactly from what point of view.
Well, here's the problem. I don't know who started it. The simple thing is, I've turned and gone, and then all of a sudden it's bubbled over. So now I've got 21 players. Now, I would suggest it's handbags at 10 paces. There's a lot of gesticulation. There's a lot of verbal threats, there's a bit of pushing and jostling. And of course, at that stage, we had no procedure for this because it was generally new to have a mass confrontation. So I stand back and I've gone, well, he's going. In my own mind, he's going. He's going. He's going. And he might be going. And I'm thinking, I just stepped back and thought, if I carry on at that rate, they'll all be off. And so I don't know why, but I asked myself, out of fairness, given what you've seen, you've got a choice. All off and none off. And then I knew then that would raise questions after the match. But then the FA could then sort it with video. And they settled down really well. And, you know, got in the dressing room. There were no recriminations. Knock on the door. Thanks very much, Ref. Thought you handled that well. And I asked for both secretaries and said, look, I want you to know that I'm going to report this all matter. And I've no doubt the FA will look at the video. So a few weeks later, I'm at Wembley discussing the incident, playing the video, and somebody at the FA said, well, Mr. Hackett, now you've seen the video, what do you think? And I'm going, well, I could have sent quite a few off, couldn't I? I said, but the reality is I don't have a video to look at on the field of play. I can only act on what I'm seeing, and I'm not going to guess. And they were very complimentary that I hadn't guessed. But I think at the end of the day, it was the fullback of Arsenal and Brian McClare that was at the centre of the dispute that had spilled over into others. So, yeah, I think it's the only time the FA have ever deducted points. They've not deducted points from anybody since. Okay, you might now if you break the fair play award and all that in the Championship, but that's not happened in the Premier League. Out of that, just interestingly, I decided then to start to pen what was the best way to manage that, and started writing a protocol which was used very successfully by Howard Webb in the 1996 Carling Cup final. If any of your viewers want to go and watch that, it's Arsenal versus Chelsea, where I think in the 90th minute it blew up in a similar manner. But we had a protocol then. So Howard Webb was in the middle. First of all, he had to ask Arsene Wenger and Mourinho to leave the field because they'd come on to try and calm it down. And then the process is the referee, if he's got any reds, issues the reds, which he did. Then he asks, are there any more reds? So he sent the away team player off first, designated the away team, even though it's at Wembley. Then the home team player. Then he asked his two assistants, who are now, of course, communicate. I introduced, when I was boss of the PGMOL, the communication kits into refereeing, into football refereeing. And so they're able to talk, and an Arsenal player had gone a bit crazy. So he got a red card, and then there was 2 yellows. So, yeah, it was a protocol that worked more efficiently on the field of play because the 2 assistants came in and helped Howard sort out the problem.
And also with your help in terms of writing the protocol, they had actually guidance, because you had to, when experiencing that brawl with Arsenal, you had to, assess it on your own. There was no protocol there. You helped these referees in the future after you to know what to do next time, so they won't have to experience what you've gone through.
Yeah, and the other side of it was that the the Premier League then decided that for this type of incident, because they considered it damaged the image of the game, the clubs would be fined. In future cases, the clubs could be fined up to a sum of $250,000. And what happened then was there were lots of clubs who were saying to their players, if this happens, you're going to pay. We're not going to pay as a club. You're going to pay. So I think all those actions helped. But look, football's a contact sport. It's played with a great deal of passion. And on the odd occasion, it just spills over. And this occasion, there was no... Well, I think on the day there was a bit of venom. I don't think afterwards.
That's good. A question I wanted to ask you was, is out of all the games you refed, which one was your toughest and why? Would you say it's the Man United versus the Arsenal one? You might have just answered that. Or would you? Which one was the one you most enjoyed? The one you enjoyed the most?
Well, I got a great deal of enjoyment out of football. It doesn't matter whether it was in the local park, because when people smile, but you mentioned the '88 Champions final opening game. That Sunday morning, I refereed in the local parks, 2 pub teams, and that's what I used to do. I'd referee in the Premier League, but the following day on a Sunday, I'd referee in the local park. That's less so now. But I derived a lot of enjoyment out of football and travel. I refereed East Germany versus Switzerland, and had to go through Checkpoint Charlie. Remarkable. Oh. I used to referee in the Eastern Bloc countries where, the wall and everything. That'd be Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, and other areas, Moscow, Russia. I can remember refereeing Rijeka versus Real Madrid. And Rijeka, which is like almost a low-level club at that time, now a Croatian team, but then a Yugoslavian team, beating the great Real Madrid, and the hysterics of that city afterwards, or should I say fishing village afterwards, was remarkable. I travelled to New Zealand via Australia. I refereed in Azteca Stadium, 120,000 spectators. So a great deal of enjoyment. I suppose ultimately at the end of the day, refereeing a cup final was for me the pinnacle of my career, which I totally enjoyed. The most difficult, I have to bring in Tony Gale and West Ham, because I refereed West Ham United versus Nottingham Forest in a FA Cup semi-final at Villa Park. And the Thursday before that game, all the referees in the Football League had been called to a meeting in Coventry. And we were told that our interpretation of the denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity was incorrect. At that stage, we were all saying that the challenge that had to be made had to be cynical. And therefore, there were a number of occasions in that season when a foul took place and no punishment took place at all. But we were then told and reminded that it was a small foul. And if it denied an opportunity of a goal-scoring chance, then the player had to go off. Sadly, the interpretation was changed the Thursday before my FA Cup semi-final. So when Tony Gale fouled Gary Crosby, it was denial, and it was exactly how we were informed the law had to be applied. And so he got a red card. And that was very difficult, because I've got to tell you, the week before, if Tony Gale had committed that offence, I'd more likely have shouted play on or not even given a free kick. Not because it wasn't a foul, I just like to keep the game moving. So, to the amazement of everybody in the stadium, home and away fans, by that I mean even Nottingham Forest were surprised, and one or two players are saying to me, "You got that right, ref." And I then had to defend what I'd done on the basis of, look, this is the new interpretation. Again, the outcome of that was when I was boss of the PGMOL, I sort of informed anybody that we weren't going to change during the course of the season anything. But what I would do is, at the start of a season, I would talk to all the managers in the Premier League and the Football League in meetings around the country and get our referees to go in clubs and talk to players about the law changes, and to avoid a player getting a red card without knowing he's got a red card. And maybe had he known that if he'd made that challenge, he would get a red card, he might not have done it. So I think information is so important. That's why I do a lot of social media. That's why I write in the Daily Telegraph. It gives me an opportunity to put across refereeing issues. And sometimes those are often balanced, I suppose, in a way that I'm criticizing some existing referees. I also praise them, but praise doesn't necessarily get into the media format. And if you take a decision like the one at the weekend, in the West Ham versus Liverpool game, the challenge by Creswell was an excessive force challenge that endangered the safety of an opponent. So I'm disappointed that the referee didn't see that challenge as a red card, and then appalled by the fact that in not making a decision, the VAR decided not to intervene or whisper in his ear that that's a red card. And the outcome was nothing. So a player got away with what I consider to be a red card. It was, if you like, magnified by the fact that at another game, Everton, Holgate was sent off for almost an identical challenge. So this is where I think I get involved, because I think that fans around the world need to be aware of what the law is. And, I'll touch on it, because the thing that I hear from players and former players and pundits and the like is, well, he got the ball first. But the advice to referees is clear. Getting the ball has minimal relevance as to whether a foul has occurred. That might surprise you. There is no reference to making contact with the ball in the section relating to fouls and misconduct in the laws of the game. It talks about careless, reckless, excessive force that endangers the safety of an opponent. And therefore, it's so important when you're actually discussing a referee's performance, you then have to say, just a minute, that referee needs some operational advice. So the PGMOL should be giving that. I talked about the fact that I was an amateur in a professional game, and it was me that went to the Premier League and suggested that we needed a group of professional referees. So I instigated the start of the PGMOL with others, and then became its boss. And communicating with fans. I mean, when I was boss of the PGMOL, I visited certain grounds and spoke to the spectators. And everybody thinks, oh, I bet they went at your throat. No, things like what happened at the weekend can be explained. Don't try to come on television and justify that, as sometimes happens with my former charges like Dermot Gallagher and Peter Walton, fudge it. And I don't think that's helpful to the game, helpful to referees going forward. And, it's got to be a learning experience. But then I used to operate with accountability. I used to say that I was the 21st manager in the PGMOL. And just like a player who loses form, a referee can likewise lose form. And the manager doesn't pick him. And that's exactly the same with me. And when that happens on a regular basis, I suddenly went, look, I'm sorry. You're no longer a member of the elite group of referees in England. I've got to move you on and demote you in some instances. Not an easy task. But if you want the very best, then you've got to be sharp. But I mean, I visited people, I visited the managers. I went to Radlett. I talked with Arsene Wenger, a brilliantly intelligent guy whose team displayed magic at times. And he initially didn't want to speak to me. So I spoke to effectively his boss, David Dean, and said, look, I think that I do need to speak to him. I do need to speak to about various aspects of our involvement as referees and what we're doing. But we moved refereeing because I brought in sports psychologists, sports scientists, vision scientists, Prozone, which was a product that Arsenal, Manchester United and other clubs were using to analyse performance. So I knew and could interrogate every decision the referee made, his distance from ball at the point he made the decision. I could look at the DVD again, the same, because it was on the same system, and link them together. And then we set targets because I knew that referees were running on average 11,500 meters. We increased that. We then looked at high speeds. So if you looked at Thierry Henry, when in possession of the ball, moved at a speed of 7 meters per second. And Prozone had classed that as a high-speed sprint. And so in refereeing terms, if we're to be in proximity to play, because here's the process of a referee. He first of all has to see, recognise, think, and then act. And when I've analysed referees' errors, invariably they don't see. They're not in the position to see. So my job was to make certain through 2 sports scientists and training regimes that they were able to move at pace and produce something like a minimum of 1,000 meters in a game at 7 meters per second. So somebody like Howard Webb and Clattenburg and Halsey and Paul could move from penalty area to penalty area in 11 seconds. And so when you're actually trying to squeeze out the very best in performance in a referee, then you've got to bring in sports science. And you've got to have a very clear picture of each individual referee. And I want to know and analyse his decisions. How accurate is his decision? I often hear 98, 99% quoted. Well, I could say 99%. I didn't. Because are you interested as a fan as to the ball out of play? The goal kick, you got that one right. Corner kick, got that one right. Those are important decisions, but not the most important decisions. Is it a penalty kick? Is it a red card offence? Is it a goal, not a goal? And, I can remember sitting in the director's box at Old Trafford when Mark Clattenburg was the referee, and Tottenham took a snapshot. The ball came out of the goal area, and Tottenham took a snapshot, and Roy Carroll dropped the ball a metre over the line. Clattenburg had no chance of seeing it because he's on the halfway line. The assistant referee was doing his job. He was in line with the second most defender, yards away from the goal line, so he couldn't make the decision. And a few weeks later, I attended the annual conference of the Premier League clubs in Leicester and was asked, blue sky thinking, what would I introduce into the game? And I said, goal line technology. They said, okay, go and try and find it and do it. And then I spent several weeks working with Hawkeye, using Motspur Park, Fulham's training ground, to get goal line technology honed. And I think that we'd still have that product sitting in a box somewhere if it wasn't for David Dean, who was able to convince FIFA that the system worked efficiently, and the secretary then of the Premier League, Mike Foster. So as a result of that, goal line technology was introduced. And so I'm a great believer in technology. Like the polar heart monitors we used, we knew the distance and everything accurately. We knew the heart rate, the recovery.
So you must have been a big technology. Fan. VAR, you're a big fan. Course,
and then, sorry, put this on. And then VAR. But so I had nothing to do with it.
So I was gonna. That's what I was gonna lead on to. So I was gonna ask, what's your thoughts on VAR and how it's being implemented at the moment? I know last year, because it wasn't on screens before, especially in the Premier League, some fans are talking about why aren't the refs not looking to VAR more. It's been advised, because since then it's been advised to look at VAR more, and they are looking at VAR. But I know some people have their tinkering issues with it. So what's your? I wanted to get your thoughts on VAR.
Well, I think what we saw was with VAR was at the World Cup, it introduced and working pretty successfully. And they had a 2-year program to develop the product prior to that World Cup. And they'd done a lot of experimentation with it and got it home to quite a degree of sophistication when it got to the World Cup. And for some unknown reason, the Premier League and the PGMOL decided we're not going to introduce it. MLS, Bundesliga, the French league, the Spanish league, they jumped straight away. Holland jumped straight away. So they were on it. So we took a year out of not using it. And there seemed to be a reluctance of the PGMOL management and the Premier League to introduce it. Then what happened was they introduced it. But they put their own spin on it. So there at the side of the pitch were monitors fixed in position. Used sparingly was the words that Mike Riley, the boss of the PGMOL, kept saying. It was used 3 times in 380 games. That means it's not used at all. So the first 2 years were an absolute disaster. And I kept, you can read my articles around the place, kept absolutely
why do you
going.
Think that is? Do you think it was due to them, like, not feeling that this VAR was, going against my judgment? But I don't know. I don't know. Was there an element of arrogance to it? Because that's what some fans.
I generally think that they hadn't bought into it. They hadn't bought into the system as a whole. And whether that's the Premier League persuading Mike Riley, the boss of the PGMOL, but it was the wrong decision because football clearly was going to have VAR. And if we are the Premier League, probably certainly one of the top competitions in the world, if not the best league in the world, it's got to be there, surely. And of course, plus the fact that I think that, if I'm honest, I was looking at some of the referees and I'm thinking to myself, they need help. They need help. So the first 2 years were a disaster. The simple fact on goal line technology is that I worked closly on that. And if I tell you that we finished up with 7 cameras around each goal, and those cameras running at a speed of 500 frames per second in order to capture accurately a decision that the ball had crossed the line. And they kept saying, we're using broadcast television. Broadcast television is about 50 frames per second. That's a great disparity there. If you take a slice of bread and you make 50 slices, they're pretty thick, and a lot of action can take place in the gaps. Whereas if you've got 500 slices, it's pretty thin, and there's not much area in the gap. So the point with offside was that not only are you you're not judging a ball over the line, you're actually judging the point at which the ball is released, the area and direction it's going to, and whether when it was kicked, the player was in an offside position. Now, I'm not getting into the relative issues of the law, but a player in an offside position, standing in an offside position, hasn't committed offence until his possession or he's interfered or gained or whatever. So I'm thinking this is flawed. And there's no area of error. So we start having the nonsense, didn't we, of like toes offside and heels offside and all that. And I'm going, this is absolutely crass. It's stupidity at the highest level. And, you know, it's only recently, isn't it, that there's actually saying, oh, by the way, when we operated in this way, we got 21 decisions wrong. I'm telling you, they got hundreds wrong. Anyhow, the thing is that I thought they started the season reasonably well. The criteria is pretty straightforward. And what happens is it's got to be a clear and obvious error. So if you take Craig Pawson and the West Ham game, which is fresh in our memory, he's not given a red card for the offence. So he's made a clear and obvious error, you would think. But the problem, I think, for the VAR is Craig Pawson didn't make a decision at all. He didn't blow his whistle. He stood there bemused and off he went. And so it was the VAR's thinking, do I come in? But I don't fulfill the criteria. Look, even now, I think there's an overindulgence by VAR on decisions. The referee's in charge, so the referee should be the one that is the sole decision maker, and VAR should help. And therefore, you've got to look at the monitor. You know, I can remember Jared Gillett on the A-League final. He's now a Premier League referee, by the way. But in Australia, he was their top referee. And Jared, there's a YouTube film of him doing the final, and he was mic'd up. And there was a decision that looked pretty simple. But he nonetheless said, look, in order to sell this decision to everybody, I'm going to go to the monitor and have a look. We agree of what the outcome is, but I'm still going to go to the monitor. And that way I'll sell the decision with the spectators and everybody else, which he did, which was the outcome. So I think that the only way last weekend was a disaster. And I get really frustrated because a former colleague of mine, Dermot Gallagher, who's an international referee, who works for Sky Sports News. He doesn't work for Sky Sports News. He appears on their programme. He's paid by the PGMOL. So he follows the PGMOL line. He don't want to criticise his mates, does he? And he wants to find everything that's good. He's a nice guy. But say it as it is. Quote the law. Quote the law.
Let's be honest. Do you think referees, you know, because I know some fans have been asking for this, do you think they should be made to, you know, explain their decision, or as you said, be mic'd up, so give the fans clarity, because there is confusion.
Yeah, I think that people would be surprised at the sort of communication skills that a referee has. The science of communication it would surprise you, because if you take the science, 55% of a communication skill, a transfer of information, is through body language. 55%, 5% verbal. So there are all aspects of being able to communicate, and you hone those skills with the referees. That's the look of the eyes. If you think of Pierluigi Collina, former Italian referee, he used his eyes a lot. You know, the stare, the glare, or whatever you want to put to it. So I think that, you know, without moving off the situation is this. Let's go back to what I said before. See, recognize, think, and act. And I see referees like Graham Scott this weekend in the Crystal Palace game stopping 10 yards before the edge of the penalty area. Some of his actions, he's running, and then all of a sudden he puts the brake on, and the game's going away from him. So the distance is increasing. So the vulnerability is he's not going to see it. So he gives a penalty kick. And VAR comes in and says, no, it's a foul outside the area. He could have avoided that if he'd have been in position. And then you had David Koo in his game. There's a clear penalty kick in his game. I think it was Brighton. I've got it somewhere in my notes. I think it was Brighton game. And, you know, there's a Brighton-Newcastle. So there's a penalty kick, and he doesn't give it. But I'm telling you, 99 out of 100 referees in the local park would have given that penalty kick. It was so obvious. And you go, and he's gone, no. You can see him on the video, no, to the player who's been brought down. I'm thinking, that's a penalty kick, mate. In comes VAR and pulls him out. And then later in the game, Newcastle players on the break, you might remember it. He's still in like Newcastle's half. He's so far behind play, it's untrue, which is poor reading of the game. And he's trying to catch up, in fairness to him. And the goalkeeper fouls Callum Wilson of Newcastle. And he's gone, no, bike pedals. And I'm going, that's a red card. Eventually they get it right. So the first thing that I would say about VAR is this. I'm going a long-winded answer. The referee has to get it right first time and not rely too much of the VAR or the confidence in the VAR or worrying about the VAR. VAR will come in when it needs to come in. And then you are going to say to VAR, I'm going to look at the screen. And then when you go to the screen, you've really got to have the courage to actually say to VAR, get lost, mate. I'm sticking with what I've got. I've seen it as I've seen it. So I think those are the areas of like the relationship between VAR. But, you know, this weekend you had somebody refereeing on a Saturday and then VAR the following day or fourth official. Hey, you know, we've got two world-class referees in Anthony Taylor and Michael Oliver, and they are effectively shoring up some of the others who need to get their act together. I said it on Merseyside Radio this week, and I'll tell you, they'll probably finish up hating my guts, some of these referees, but they weren't the ones that went to the Premier League and said, look, I think we need professional referees. I did that. And why do you need professional referees? Because, you know, I once refereed a game at Arsenal, right? I'll tell you this. And I was a sales and marketing director, and I was in my office in Sheffield at 4:00. Now you try and travel 4:00 for a 7:45 kickoff at Highbury. Just think about that. Think of the speeds I went. Think of the pressure that you're under, not for the game of football. But, you know, I refereed New Zealand v Australia. I came off. It was not a challenging game at all. But then I got back to the hotel to be advised I'd lost my job because I'd taken time off to referee a football match in New Zealand. And I determined that the game was getting quicker, that we need a more professional approach in refereeing. And the only way you're going to achieve that is to have them effectively moving towards full time. And in those opening years of the PGMOL, I was the development manager for a couple of years with Philip Dawn. We changed the face of refereeing, and that has been copied. That model has been copied around the world and was formed part of a UEFA referee convention. Are we gaining anything from it in England? Not enough, because we've got a weak boss at the PGMOL who won't allow or doesn't want to allow referees to be the very best. And I think that's a shocking statement to make, but I go and I look and I think, Graham Scott, you've some work to do. Simon Hooper, sorry, mate, I don't think you're good enough. Chris Kavanagh, you're the best decision maker that came onto the list, and I thought you were going to really be a star player, but you've got lazy. Oh, and talking about lazy, I use this analogy about VAR. Think of the tightrope walker. He's on that rope. It's waving. The wind's blowing. If he comes off, he falls to his death. So I'm telling you, every step that he makes, he's very careful. Every step that he's made, he's probably made 10,000 similar steps. Feel, knowledge, he's gained all that. He's sharp, he's focused, his concentration's spot on. Now think of the same tightrope walker, and you've introduced a net because he's in the circus. He's not going to fall onto the ring floor, is he? He's got a net. He falls into that and he bounces. So what he does is he gets careless. He doesn't worry about the next step. He's not too worried about anything, really. His concentration's not sharp. And this is what we've got with VAR and what we've got with some of our referees. They're thinking, oh, don't worry, we've got VAR. He'll pull me out of the mire. So I think there's some work to be done. I think we've got the potential. I think Michael Oliver is an outstanding referee. I think he's rated in the top 5 in Europe. I think he'll go to the World Cup. Don't use him as VAR. Don't use him as fourth official. Get him sharp and keep him sharp. But they don't. They use him in all places. So at the end of the day, gets into spring and he starts fatiguing because he's traveling around Europe. He's doing World Cup preliminary games. I think they're already on about 16 games season to date. And referees need rest. They're not like players, by the way. Players are driven to grounds in coaches and everything else. The referee's got to find his own transport, his own car. So there you go. I think there's some work to be done at the very highest level. I think there's other countries that have taken our systems on board and are now producing some top-class referees. The questions I ask, will we get to a point where we're actually sharing with referees with other countries? Should Danny Mekalele or Bjorn Kuipers or other top-class European referees come and referee our games in the Premier League, and our referees go and referee their games in Europe? You
Should
know,
more English referees be managing in the World Cup? Because that's been talked about. Why isn't there enough other referees managing the top European Cups, such as the Euros, such as the World? Well, the Euros this year has had a bit more, and that's primarily because it was
yeah.
all over the place. But for example, the World Cup last time in 2018, I don't think there was an English ref even refereed a game, but it was
Well, in
refereed from
the last World Cup, there wasn't. In the Euro, there was Taylor and Clattenburg and his colleagues, of course, and they produced some pretty good performances. So I think that, you know, when I'm criticising, I'm hardly criticising Taylor and Oliver. I think that they are world-class referees. I think there are others who've got to try and come up to the plate and meet their specification, work hard at it, rather than actually getting the badge, getting the salary, and not progressing. But that's down to the coach. That's like having a team of top-class players, and they don't perform. I mean, and what happens if you're Newcastle United and your other teams? You offload the manager, don't you?
That's what we're going to end it today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Keith Hackett. It's been an
Pleasure.
absolute honor, pleasure. There's not many words I could describe. The stories have been amazing. Thank you all for watching. Keith Hackett, any words do you wanna promote? Any books? Where can we find you? Because honestly, it was amazing. It was amazing.
Well, I do a weekly podcast, which is Seen Them Given, which I enjoy doing each Monday. I obviously write occasionally, and almost every week, but occasionally I'll say in the Daily Telegraph, I write in that column. I write for articles for Court Offside, and I review games for the Insider. So, and then I also write, believe it or not, for a Chinese magazine called Football Weekly. I have a colleague in Shanghai, Chinese guy, really nice guy. I helped his dissertation. He was at Loughborough University, took a master's degree in sports business, and we keep in contact. And so he asked me for articles, I write them. He then converts them, and they get published in a terrific magazine called Football Weekly. Not that you'd want to buy one, because they are printed in Mandarin. Yeah, but good. Delighted to be on this show. Thanks.
I would love, honestly, Keith Hackett, I would love to have you on again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's been watching, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye.
Thanks, Dan.